Chocky continues as read by the bathroom reader. I am covering for the plurality report. Who is wondering, what's red, pink, purple, and can't turn around in a hallway? Stick to the end for the answer. Chapter 2. Piff was a small, or supposedly small, invisible friend that Polly had acquired when she was about 5, and while she lasted, she was a great nuisance. One would start to sit down upon a conveniently empty chair, only to be arrested in an unstable and inelegant pose by a cry of anguish from Polly. One had, it seemed, been about to sit on Piff, and any unexpected movement, too, was liable to bowl over the intangible Piff, who would then be embraced and comforted by a lot of sympathetic muttering about careless and brutal daddies. Frequently, and more likely than not, when a knockout seemed imminent, or the television play had reached the brink of its denouement, there would come an urgent call from Polly's bedroom above. The cause had to be investigated, although the odds were about 4 to 1 that it would concern Piff's dire need of a drink of water. We would sit down at a table for 4 in a cafe, and there would be agonized appeals to a mystified waitress for an extra chair for Piff. I could be in the act of releasing my clutch when a startling yell would inform me that Piff was not yet with us, and the car door had to be opened to let her aboard. Once I testily refused to wait for her. It was not worth it. My heartlessness had clouded our whole day. Piff, for one of her kind, had been remarkably diuturnal. She must have been with us the best part of a year, and it seemed a great deal longer. But in the end, she somehow got mislaid during our summer holiday. Polly, much taken up with several more substantial and much more audible new friends, dropped Piff with great callousness, and she was still missing on our return journey. Once I was satisfied that she was not going to follow and take up residence with us again, I was able to feel quite sorry for the deserted Piff, apparently doomed to wander forever in summer's traces upon the forlorn beaches of Sussex. Nevertheless, her absence came as a great relief, even, one suspected, to Polly herself. The idea that we might now have acquired another such was by no means welcome. A grim thought, said I, but fortunately improbable, I think. A Piff can provide useful bossing material for a member of the younger female age groups, but an 11-year-old boy who wants to boss seems to me more likely to take it out on other and smaller boys. I'm sure I hope you're right, Mary said, but dubiously. One Piff was more than enough. There's quite a different quality here, I pointed out. If you remember, Piff spent about 80% of her time being scolded for something or other and having to take it. This one appeared to be criticizing and coming back with opinions of its own. Mary looked startled. What do you mean? I don't see how. I repeated, as nearly cis I could recall, the one-sided conversation I had overheard. Mary frowned as she considered it. I don't understand that at all, she said. Oh, it's simple enough. After all, the arrangement of a calendar is just a convention. But that's just what it isn't. Not to a child, David. To an 11-year-old it seems like a natural law, just as much as day and night or the seasons. A week is a week and it has 7 days. It's an unquestionable provision. It just is so. Well, that's more or less what Matthew was saying, but apparently he was being argued with, or he was arguing with himself. In either case, it isn't easy to explain. He must have been arguing with what someone's told him at school, one of his teachers most likely. I suppose so, I conceded. All the same, it's a new one on me. I've heard of calendar reformers who want all months to have 28 days, but never of anyone advocating an 8-day week, or, come to that, a 32-day month. I pondered a moment. Besides, it just doesn't begin to be on. For one thing, you'd need 19 more days in a year. I shook my head. Anyway, I went on, I don't mean to make heavy weather of it. It just strikes me as odd. I wondered if you had noticed anything of the sort, too. Mary lowered her knitting again and studied its pattern thoughtfully. No, well, not exactly. I have heard him muttering to himself occasionally, but nearly all children do at that times. I'm afraid I didn't pay any attention. Actually, I was anxious not to do anything which might encourage another pith. But there is one thing. The question he's been asking lately. Lately, I repeated. Was there ever a time when he didn't? I know, but these are a bit different. I mean, well, usually his questions have been average boy questions. I hadn't noticed they'd changed. Oh, the old kind keep on, but there's a new kind too, with a different sort of slant. Such as? Well, one of them was about why are there two sexes. He said he didn't see why it was necessary to have two people to produce one, so how had it got arranged that way, and why? That's a difficult one, you know, on the spur of the moment. Well, it's difficult anyway, isn't it? I frowned. Now you come to mention it, of course, it does sort of help to, spread the load. I tried, doubtfully. But I didn't mention it. Matthew did. And there was another one, too, about where is Earth? Now I ask you, where is Earth? In relation to what? Oh, yes, he knows it goes round the sun, but where, please, is the sun? And there were some others, simply not his kind of questions. I appreciated her point. Matthew's questions were plentiful and quite varied, but they usually kept a more homely orbit. Things like, why do you use a washer with a nut? Or, why can't we live on grass if horses can? A new phase, I suggested. He's reached a stage where things are beginning to widen out for him. Mary shook her head, giving me a look of reproach. That, darling, is what I've been telling you. What I want to know is why they should widen, and his interests apparently change quite so suddenly. But why not? What do you expect? Isn't it what children go to school for, to have their minds widen and their interests expanded? I know, she said, frowning again. But that's not quite it, David. This doesn't seem to me like just development. It's more as if he'd switched to a different track. It's a sudden change in quality and approach. She went on, frowning for the pause, before she added, I do wish we knew a little more about his parents. That might help. In Polly I can see bits of you and bits of me. It gives one a feeling of something to go on. But with Matthew there's no guide at all. There's nothing to give me any idea what to expect. I could see what she meant, though I have my reservations about the validity of this ability to see parent in child. I could also see where we were heading. In about 3 more moves we'd be back at the old unprofitable contest, heredity versus environment. To sidestep that, I said, it looks to me as if the best thing we can do for the present is simply to listen and watch carefully, though not obviously, until we can get a firmer impression. It's no good worrying ourselves over what may easily be an insignificant passing phase. And there we decided to leave it for the time being. But only briefly. I collected my next specimen the following day. For our Sunday afternoon walk, Matthew and I had chosen the river bank. I had not mentioned to him the conversation I had overheard, and did not intend to, but as a result of it, and of my walk with Mary, I observed Matthew with more attention than usual. My talk with Mary. It was not well rewarded. As far as I could tell, he seemed to be quite his ordinary self. I wondered if he were not a shade more noticing, showing ever so slightly more awareness of the things about us. I couldn't be sure. I suspected it of being subjective, simply that I was being more noticing and aware of things about Matthew. I could not detect any significant variation of his interests and questions, not until we had been going for half an hour and were passing below 5 Elms Farm. The path there led us through a field where a couple of dozen cows blankly eyed us on our way. Only then did Matthew take a swerve off his usual beat. We were almost across the field, just a little short of the stile in the far side hedge, when he slowed to a halt and stood there regarding the nearest cow seriously. The cow looked back at Matthew with a tinge of disquiet, I thought. After he and the cow had contemplated one another for a few moments, Matthew asked, "Daddy, why is it a cow stops?" It sounded at first like a "why does a chicken cross the road" question, but as he asked it, Matthew continued to study the cow with great concentration. The animal appeared to find this embarrassing. It started to swing its head from side to side without taking its glassy eyes off his face. I decided to take the question straight. "How do you mean? Why does it stop what?" "Well, it gets a bit of the way, and then it doesn't seem able to get any further. Ever. I don't see why not." I was still out of touch. "A bit of the way where?" The cow lost interest and decided to move away. Matthew watched it thoughtfully as it went. "What I mean is, when old Albert comes to the yard gate there, all the cows understand that it's milking time. They all know which stall to go to in the shed, and they understand about waiting there until they've been milked. Then, when it's over and Albert opens the gate again, they understand about going back into the field. But there they just stop. I don't see why." I was beginning to get his drift. "You mean they just stop understanding?" I tried. "Yes. You see, they don't want to stay in this field, because if they can find a gap in the hedge, they get out. So, if they want to go out, why don't they just open the gate for themselves and go out that way? They could, easily." "Well, they don't know how to open it." "That's just it, Daddy. Why don't they understand how to open it? They've watched Albert do it hundreds of times, every time they've been milked. They've got brains enough to remember which stall to go to. Why can't they remember how Albert opens the gate? I mean, if they understand some things, why not a simple thing like that? What is it that doesn't go on happening inside their heads so that they stop?" That led us on to the question of limited intelligence, which was a concept that baffled him entirely. He could grasp the idea of no intelligence. You just hadn't got it. But once you had it, how could it be limited? Surely if you went on applying and applying even a little intelligence, it might take a longish time, but it must come up with the answer sooner or later. How could there possibly be such things as boundary lines to intelligence? It was a discussion that continued for the rest of our walk. By the time we got home, I had a good idea of what Mary had meant. It was not the sort of inquiry, and by no means the sort of subsequent debate, that one associated with Matthew. She agreed, when I reported it to her, that I had collected quite a good specimen. It was about 10 days later that we first heard about Chocky. It might well have been longer had Matthew not picked up some fluey germ at school which caused him to run quite a temperature for a while. When it was at its height, he rambled a bit, with all defenses down. There were times when he did not seem to know whether he was talking to his mother, or his father, or to some mysterious character he called Chocky. Moreover, this Chocky appeared to worry him, for he protested several times. On the second evening, his temperature ran high. Mary called down to me to come up. Poor Matthew looked in a sorry state. His color was high, his brow was damp, and he was very restless. He kept rolling his head from side to side on the pillow, almost as if he were trying to shake it free of something. In a tone of weary exasperation, he said, "No, no, Chocky, not now. I can't understand. I want to go to sleep. No. Oh, do shut up and go away. No, I can't tell you now." He rolled his head again and pulled his arms from under the bedclothes to press his hands over his ears. "Oh, do stop it, Chocky! Do shut up!" Mary reached across and put her hand on his forehead. He opened his eyes and became aware of her. "Oh, Mummy, I'm so tired. Do tell Chocky to go away. She doesn't understand. She won't leave me alone." Mary glanced questioning at me. I could only shrug and shake my head. She sat down on the side of the bed, propped Matthew up a little, and held a glass of orange juice for him to drink. "There," she said. "Now lie down, darling, and try to get to sleep." Matthew lay back. "I want to go to sleep, Mummy, but Chocky doesn't understand. He will keep on talking. Please make him shut up." Mary laid her hand on his forehead again. "There now," she soothed him. "You'll feel better when you wake up. But do tell him, Mummy. He won't listen to me. Tell him to go away now." Mary hesitated and glanced at me again. This time it was she who shrugged. Then she rose to the occasion. Turning back, she addressed herself to a point slightly above Matthew's head. I recognized the technique she had sometimes used with Piff. In a kindly but firm tone, she said, "Chocky, you really must let Matthew be quiet and rest. He isn't at all well, Chocky, and he needs to go to sleep. So please go away and leave him alone now. Perhaps, if he's better tomorrow, you can come back then." "See," said Matthew, "you've got to clear out, Chocky, so that I can get better." He seemed to listen. "Yes," he said decisively. It appeared to work. In fact, it did work. He lay back again and visibly relaxed. "She is gone," he announced. "That's fine. Now you can settle down," said Mary. And he did. He wriggled into a comfortable position and lay quiet. Presently his eyes closed. In a very few minutes he was fast asleep. Mary and I looked at one another. She tucked his bedclothes closer and put the bell-push handy. We tiptoed to the door, turned off the room light, and went downstairs. "Well, what are we supposed to make of that?" "Aren't they astonishing?" said Mary. "Dear, oh dear, it does very much look as if this family is landed with another Piff." I poured us some sherry, handed Mary hers, and raised mine. "Here's to hoping it turns out to be less of a pest than the last one," I said. I set down the glass and looked at it. "You know, I can't help feeling there's something wrong about this. As I said before, Piffs aren't unusual with little girls, but I don't remember hearing of an 11-year-old boy inventing one. It seems out of order somehow. I must ask someone about it." Mary nodded agreement. "Yes, but what strikes me as even odder is, did you notice? He doesn't seem to be clear in his own mind whether his Chocky is a him or a her. Children are usually very positive about that. They feel it's important." "I wouldn't say the feeling of importance is entirely restricted to children, but I see what you mean, and you're perfectly right, of course. It is odd. The whole thing's odd." Matthew's temperature was down the next morning. He picked up quite quickly. In a few days he was fully recovered and about again. So too, apparently, was his invisible friend, undiscouraged by the temporary banishment. Now that Chocky's existence was out of the bag, and largely, I was inclined to think, because neither Mary nor I had displayed incredulity, Matthew gained enough confidence to be a little more forthcoming about him or her. To begin with, at any rate, she seemed a considerable improvement on the original Piff. There was none of that business of him-her invisibly occupying one's chair or feeling sick in tea shops to which Piff had been so prone. Indeed, Chocky quite markedly lacked physical attributes. She appeared to be scarcely more than a presence, having perhaps something in common with Wordsworth's cuckoo, but with the added limitation that her wandering voice was audible to Matthew alone, and intermittently at that. There were days when Matthew seemed to forget him or her altogether. Unlike Piff, she was not given to cropping up any and everywhere, nor did she show any of Piff's talent for embarrassment, such as a determined insistence on being taken to the lavatory in the middle of the sermon. On the whole, if one had to choose between the two intangibles, my preference was decidedly in favor of Chocky. Mary was less certain. "Are we," she suddenly demanded one evening, staring into the loops of her knitting with a slight squint, "are we, I wonder, doing the right thing in playing up to this nonsense? I know you shouldn't crush a child's imagination and all that, but what nobody tells you is how far is enough. There comes a stage when it begins to get a bit like conspiracy. I mean, if everyone goes around pretending to believe in things that aren't there, how on earth is a child going to learn to distinguish what really is from what really isn't?" "Careful, darling. You're steering close to dangerous waters. It chiefly depends on who and how many believe what isn't really is." She declined to be diverted. She went on. "It'd be a most unfortunate thing if we were to find out later on that we're helping to stabilize a fantasy system that we ought to be trying to dispel. Hadn't we better consult a psychiatrist about it? He could at least tell us whether it's one of the expectable things or not." "I'm rather against making too much of it. More inclined to leave it for a bit. After all, we managed to lose Piff in the end, and no harm done." "I didn't mean send him to a psychiatrist. I thought just an inquiry on general lines to find out whether it is unusual or simply nothing to bother about. I'd feel easier if we knew." "I'll ask around if you like. I don't think it's serious. It seems to me a bit like fiction. We read our kind of fiction. Children often make up their own and live it. The thing that does trouble me a bit about it is that this Chocky seems to have barged into the wrong age group. I think we'll find it will fade away after a bit. If it doesn't, we can consult someone about it." I wasn't, I admit, being quite honest when I said that. Some of Matthew's questions were puzzling me considerably. Not only by their un-Matthew-like character, but because, now that Chocky's existence was acknowledged, Matthew did not always present the questions as his own. Quite frequently he would preface them with, "Chocky says he doesn't see how," or "Chocky wants to know," or "Chocky says she doesn't understand why." I let that pass, though it seemed to me rather a childish foible for a boy of Matthew's age. What made me more uneasy was Matthew's trick of appearing to take part in any ensuing discussion merely as a go-between. He sustained the role of interpreter so well. However, one thing at least I felt could be cleared up. "Look here," I told him. "I get all confused with this he and she business. On grounds of grammar alone, it would be easier if I knew which Chocky is." Matthew quite agreed. "Yes, it would. I thought so too. So I asked. But Chocky doesn't seem to know." "Oh, that's rather unusual. I mean, it's one of those things people are generally pretty sure about." Matthew agreed about that too. "But Chocky's sort of different," he told me earnestly. I explained all the differences between hims and hers, but she couldn't seem to get it somehow. That's funny because he's really frightfully clever, I think, but all he said was that it sounded a pretty silly arrangement and wanted to know why it's like that. I recalled that Mary had encountered a question along those lines. Matthew went on. "I couldn't tell her why, and nobody I've asked has been much help. Do you know why, Daddy?" "Well, not exactly why. It's just how it is. One of nature's ways of managing things." Matthew nodded. "That's what I tried to tell Chocky. Well, sort of. But I don't think I can have been very good at it, because she said that even if I had got it right, and it was as silly as it sounded, there still had to be a why behind it." He paused reflectively, and then added, with a nice blend of pique and regret, "Chocky keeps on finding such a lot of things, quite ordinary things, silly. It gets a bit boring. He thinks animals are just a hoot. I don't see why. I mean, it isn't their fault if they're not made clever enough to know any better than they do, is it?" We talked on for a while. I was interested and showed it, but took some pains not to appear to pump. My memories of Piff suggested that pressure brought to bear on a fantasy is more apt to producing sulks than forthcomings. From what I did learn, however, I found myself feeling a little less kindly towards Chocky. She gave an impression of being quite aggressively opinionated. Afterwards, when I recollected the entirely serious nature of our conversation, I felt some increase in uneasiness. Going back over it, I realized that not once in the course of it had Matthew even hinted, by a single word or slip, that Chocky was not just as real a person as ourselves, and I began to wonder whether Mary had not been right about consulting a psychiatrist. However, we did get one thing more or less tidied up, the him-her question. Matthew explained. "Chocky does talk rather like a boy, but a lot of the time it's not about the sort of thing boys talk about, if you see what I mean. And sometimes there's a bit of, well, you know, the sort of snooty way chaps older sisters often get." I said I did, and after we had discussed these and a few other characteristics, we decided that Chocky's balance did, on the whole, lean more to the female than the male, and agreed that in future, provided no strong evidence showed up in contradiction, it would be convenient to class Chocky as feminine. Mary gave me a thoughtful look when I reported to her that, at least, was settled. "The point is, it gives more personification if Chocky is one or the other, not just an it," I explained. "Puts a sort of picture in the mind which must be easier for him to cope with than just a vague, undifferentiated, disembodied something. And as Matthew feels, there's not much similarity to any of the boys he knows." "You decide she's feminine because you feel it will help you and Matthew to gang up on her," Mary declared. "Well, really, of all the nonsensical implications I ever heard," I began, but I broke off and let it go. I knew by her non-listening look I would be wasting my breath. She spent a few moments in reflective silence and emerged from it to say, a little wistfully, "I do think being a parent must have been a lot more fun before Freud was invented. As it is, if this fantasy game doesn't clear up in a week or two, we shall feel a moral, social, and medical obligation to do something about it. And it's such nonsense, really. I sometimes wonder if we aren't all of us a bit morbid about children nowadays. I'm sure there are more delinquents than there used to be." "I'm for keeping him clear of psychiatrists and such like if we can," I told her. "Once you let a child get the idea he's an interesting case, you turn loose a whole new box full of troubles." She was silent for some seconds, running over in her mind, I guessed, a number of the children she knew. Then she nodded. So there we let it rest, once more waiting a bit longer to see how it would go. In point of fact, it went rather differently from anything we had in mind. And now for the answer to the joke. A dead baby with a spear in its neck.